So make yourself comfortable because we're going to start with the first of the 3 talks on enlightenment. So this evening, I probably should say my name is Kulapriya, I think. Everybody necessarily will know that. So my name is Kulapriya, and I'm one of the regular members of the team here on Tuesday night. So we're starting a short series on enlightenment. So this evening, we're going to be starting by exploring what is enlightenment. Starting the talk and working down from there. So this is not an easy topic to talk about. Because I'm not. The Buddha represented here on the shrine was enlightened. And as part of that enlightenment, you accrue various names, not just the Buddha. There was various descriptions of the Buddha. So he was variously known as he who was fully awakened, implying, probably quite correctly, that we are not fully awakened, either metaphorically or in some cases literally. He was also one who sees things as they really are. Again, implying that we do not. One who has conquered the suffering of birth and death. Well, I certainly wouldn't say Ali had conquered that. One who was revered by all the celestial gods and devas. So he was revered by all the celestial gods and devas. And it's up to you whether you consider that as literal or just as a metaphor showing that the Buddha was considered to be the highest being in the universe. His experience of enlightenment was considered the highest that there can be. Interestingly, despite being the highest in the universe, the Buddha wanted to revere. He who was revered by everything, even celestial gods and devas, wanted himself to revere. It was such an important aspect for him that he himself felt a loss after his enlightenment for having nobody or nothing to revere. So he decided he would revere the Dharma. We consider the Dharma his teaching, which he then went on after enlightenment to leave for us. I think it's probably what he revered was just the complexity and beauty of the reality which he had seen at a level that nobody else had. So for me, it means that he revered reality, the beauty of reality. So given all that, who on earth am I to try and explain what that was that the Buddha saw? But given that I don't want the embarrassment of the shortest ever talk, good have said, I think I'm going to try and unpack as best I can from where I'm at, what that might look like, feel like, be like. And we can start with what the difficulty must have been for the Buddha. The Buddha had a fundamental difficulty in trying to explain his experience of enlightenment to people who don't understand enlightenment. So enlightenment was not something like the theory of relativity that can be explained to those of us who understand X's and Y's and lots of squiggles and things talking of each other. It cannot be explained as a sort of an intellectual understanding. It was an experience that was different from an intellectual understanding, like a theory of relativity or something complex like that. To give you some idea of what the Buddha was trying to do, there's a little thought experiment. So imagine there is another planet with beings very much like us, who speak fluent English and who have come to visit. And we are in conversation with these beings. But these beings are like us in most respects, except they don't have salt on their planet. They do not need salt for their biology, for their well-being. And during the conversation, the word salty comes up. And they think, what? And you say, well, it was salty. And it was. And you were like, what's salty? How would you go about explaining an experience of salty to somebody who has never tasted, seen, or known anything about salt? Would you begin by getting out the chemistry book and talking about its sodium and chlorine that react, and this happens, and these bonds occur, and it dissolves in water, and dissolves in other fluids, and it forms crystals, and so on and so on? Would that help? Would any of that help to get across to those beings the simple sense of salty? No, it would probably just confuse them. The only thing that would get that sense across to them would be a crisp or a twiggle. That is the only way that you would project. That was the only way you would be able to get that sense across to those beings. And in a way, that was the dilemma that the Buddha found himself in. What mechanisms could he have to explain to us what he had seen and what he understood? Well, he did have some very good ideas and some very good ways of trying to explain it. And basically, he spent the rest of his life expounding and unfolding what we now know as the Dharma. And in the Dharma, the nutshell of the Dharma is basically nothing more than follow this and you will hopefully, if you do this assiduously, experience what I experienced. He was just giving us multiple doorways, ideas, and in different ways, just like different facets, different angles, the Dharma is trying to reach each of us to bring us towards that experience. They are all invitations. All of the Dharma is nothing more or less than an invitation to experience enlightenment. That's what he wanted. He wanted us to experience what he experienced. And this was the only way he could do it. He couldn't give us a chip or a twiglet or a crisp to let us do it. He had to try his best to explain it in words as an invitation for us to come along and reach that experience ourselves. And in a nutshell, that's all the Dharma is. All of the Dharma, that's all it is. However, we could nip round the corner and go to the reading room and take down the multiple volumes of the Pali Canon. That's the original, as far as we know, to the original words of the Buddha. And we could start at page 1 and we could assiduously read all the way through to page 7,000 or however many there may be. We could be fluent in all of the lists of the Dharma, the sixes of this, the fives of that, fours of the next things, the eights of so on and so forth. But we still wouldn't have the experience. We still wouldn't be there. There still remains something mysterious. We cannot think or layer our way to an experience of enlightenment. It still has a huge element of mystery. And for me, that mystery emanates from the shrine we have here, the shrine we have in all of our shrine rooms here in the Buddhist Center. There's something in all shrines, all Buddhist shrines, there's something mysterious that emanates from somewhere behind it, somewhere deep within it. There's something emanating from this. And there's something in that draws me forward. And what it is that shrine, that image of the Buddha, the enlightened being, represents the enlightenment that I am at least, orientated towards. And it's an invitation. It's an invitation to draw me forward. There's an enlightened me. There's an enlightened Kulapriya somewhere behind that shrine. And that's where I feel I'm being pulled and that I am headed. That's the mystery of enlightenment. It's kind of embodied in the shrine itself. So what I'd like you to do now is to take a little exercise, and just take a few minutes. And I'd like you to just sit quietly and just regard the shrine, just look at the shrine, and just feel receptive and open to what that shrine means or says to you. And try to imagine what an enlightened you somewhere behind that shrine would look like, would feel like, and how an enlightened you would act. We'll just do that for a few minutes. So I hope you all got some sort of sense of what it is that we are trying to communicate, what the Buddha was trying to communicate to us all. But there is a sort of subtle twist, there is a slight trick in that exercise, in inviting you to see yourselves as an enlightened version of yourselves. And the slight subtle kind of twist or trick in that is that we can't see an enlightened version of ourselves from the version where we are now. We don't know what an enlightened version of us would be like. We know what it would look like. We look very similar to the feel right now. Well, probably a few years older, the time we might get, But we don't know what it would be like. We don't know how we would feel. We have to kind of discover that. But it is a useful exercise for the reason that sometimes thoughts of enlightenment and all these lofty ideas can be a little bit anxiety inducing, can be a little bit scary almost. So it's useful to at least have some sense of a kind of an intermediate step of what we could be like if we were better than we are now. And once we're better than we are now, we can have a view of how we would be when we're better than that. And so we can sequentially move forward without feeling slightly overwhelmed or anxious or even afraid of the kind of magnitude that we may feel thinking about enlightenment itself. It will be at the end, but intermediate steps can be very useful and helpful ways to move forwards. In a way, whilst we're moving towards enlightenment, we'll be constantly improving the life that we have now. We'll be constantly improving the way we are now. Because the experience of enlightenment isn't a bit like going to see the Mona Lisa in Paris, where you go to Paris, you go to the Louvre, you find the gallery, you see the Mona Lisa, you might be absolutely blown away by the subtlety of the smile, the beauty. You might think, oh, it's a bit smaller than I expected. You might think, oh, it's a bit dull. You might think, oh, I thought the postcard was nice. You might think all of these sorts of things, however you think is fun. But you do that, then you leave the Louvre, you go for lunch, and you go, well, we've got 4 hours. How do we get to the Sacré-Cœur here? And you just move on with your life. So you've had the experience of the Mona Lisa, and it may have changed you some teensy little bit. Probably it won't a few months later. It won't be in your radar at all when you saw the Mona Lisa. You just come back and go on with your life, and you have another experience somewhere else. Enlightenment experience wouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be like that at all. It wouldn't be like an experience of kind of us plus a thing that's better. So I'm me as I am, plus I've won the lottery. Or I'm me as I am, plus I've got a holiday villa in Tuscany. It wouldn't be like that, good as each of those sorts of things would be. The experience of enlightenment, in a way, the word experience is wrong. It is a transformation. It is a transformation of how we are and how we see and interact with ourselves and the world around us. It would be a complete transformation of our minds. So enlightenment occurs in the mind. It is a transformation of the mind. That is what the experience of enlightenment would do. And it would change you irrevocably. You would not just then go back on the bus and go to Tesco's, saying nothing has happened. You would be changed irrevocably after that experience of transformation. Words start to become a little bit difficult once we get to try to describe that point. And because of the kind of fundamental nature of that transformation of how our minds are and how our minds perceive, that's why we can't really predict what that will be like. We just can't predict it. We can predict the intermediate steps, but we can't predict what that final step would be like. We can see the Buddha's told us, he talked quite a lot about, in a way, what the attributes would be like. So we know lots about the attributes of an enlightened mind. An enlightened mind would be completely free of any attachment to any sense of me or mine. So where we might think a villa in Tuscany or winning the lottery would be a nice thing, a nice experience, actually from an enlightened point of view, they would be irrelevant because they're tinged with a me and mine in them. They're tinged with craving. The enlightened mind would have no craving. It would be interested in the lottery or the villa in Tuscany. And the enlightened mind would be infused, as it were, like a tea bag in hot water. It would be infused with an overflowing love and compassion for all beings. So it would contain the ultimate of our practice of metta. So it would be free. In a way, it would be free of all of the crudeness of our mind. All of the crudeness of our mind would have been transformed and lost. And the replacement for that loss would be beauty, love, and compassion. So at the price of crudeness, we would gain beauty, love, and compassion. So one of the questions then arises is, well, how do we do it all? What do we do? It's all very theoretical, but what can I do now? And there are various models that the Buddha left for us. There are two main ones that get discussed. One is that of Buddha nature, where there is the jewel of enlightenment, and we just need to discover it. This is kind of could be outlined in the White Lotus Sutra, the jewel in the garment, which is very well many of you may be familiar with that. So this idea that enlightenment is already within us, and all we need to do is discover it. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that for various reasons, time being one. Another one being that there's been various kind of conversations or comments or whatever over the years where people who come along and are relatively new come across this teaching, and there's a sense of, well, this teaching means that they've got, as it were, nothing more to do. That it's already there, and there's nothing more for them to do. So effort kind of struggles, but they're not actually there. Intellectually, they kind of understood a teaching, but they're not actually there. They're not transformed. So there's some dangers in that teaching. There's basically a misunderstanding. It's an easy teaching to misunderstand. So I'm not going to dwell on it because I don't want to induce any further misunderstandings. Rather, I'll stick to kind of in a way what the Buddha dwelt upon in many, many, many occasions and in many different formulations throughout his teaching, which is kind of the analogy of a path. So just as we've already seen steps of a path, that with regard to the shrine, considered ourselves as better than we are now on our way towards enlightenment, and from that point we can consider ourselves better yet again. So this sense of moving forward in steps. And actually, it's perfectly valid to go back to the discovery model and think about, well, actually the path to discovery is stepwise work in progress. So we kind of merge together. And there's a very good sutta where there were two venerable followers of the Buddha who were asking about the road to nirvana. Nirvana being another word for enlightenment. And the analogy was of a charioteer, a king, taking his chariot to a far corner of the kingdom. So he would get on the chariot and ride as far as he could. The horses would be exhausted, so he'd get a fresh set of horses, ride as far as he could, and so on and so on and so forth. So you could think of that as a bit like trying to get from Cambridge to Istanbul. So I looked that up on Rome to Rio. That's an website. Apparently, there are many different ways to get from Cambridge to Istanbul. By far the easiest is flying, but we didn't want to do that. So you can get to Cambridge, from Cambridge to Istanbul by taking the train to London, then the train to Amsterdam, then the train to Berlin, then to Sofia, and then to Istanbul. So if we take that as our model, the crux of the conversation between the two venerable gentlemen following the Buddha was, is the train to London going to get me to the destination? And the answer was no. Will I get to my destination without taking the train to London? And the answer was no. Then, will the train from London to Amsterdam take me to my destination? The answer is no. Will I get to my destination without taking the train from London to Amsterdam? The answer is no. So you get the gist. In the Buddhist language, it's been on and on and on, so on and so forth. But the crux and the point of the whole discourse was that we get to our destination by following steps. And none of these steps can be missed. You can't skip the Berlin to Sofia because you don't fancy it. You won't get to the destination. So all of the steps have to be taken in order to get to the destination. If I want to leave the room out the door, I have to walk from here to there. I can't miss a step when I get there. I mean, it seems simple. And in a way, it is simple, but it's quite profound that we have to understand that steps are necessary and no step can be missed. Luckily, in the Buddha's world of the steps towards enlightenment, we can actually work on multiple steps simultaneously, but not necessarily linear. So you could, for example, in the Buddhist world, be working on the step from London to Amsterdam and Sofia to Istanbul. You can be doing things simultaneously. So they're not quite as strict in that you have to finish one before you can start the other. But the principle that no step can be missed is still applicable. And so with that, there are a whole host of words that the Buddha outlines in his various discourses. There is the path of transformation that we talk about. There's the Transform Your Life course going on upstairs. Some of you may have done that course earlier on. Following that, there's the Transforming Self and World. The sense of transforming just infuses a lot of things that we do here at the centre. Then there's Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So of the Four Noble Truths, the fourth Noble Truth ends with the Noble Eightfold Path, the path to cessation of suffering. There's the Threefold Way, which is a slightly simpler version, where we can work on our meditation, our ethics, and wisdom. So you can see in that path, you can see how it's possible to work on things simultaneously. We can be meditating assiduously and sort of working on wisdom by reading appropriate Dharma. And always, always, we should be working on ethics. We should be working on our ethical behaviors. So we can see in that how there's a sense of simultaneousness that can occur in the idea of Buddhism. But none of the steps in it can be missed. There's the spiral path which leads off from the Tibetan Buddha life. There's the spiral path towards Nirvana. And there's the path of purity with Suddhi Magga. It's known as the path of purity. This path, we won't talk about quite so much, but it is a very beautiful pathway specifically about purifying the mind. Because it is a pure mind that is receptive enough to understand the experience of reality in terms of understanding reality. In a way, it can only seem to emerge or to be present in a pure mind. So all of these paths have as their backdrop the idea of sequential purification, particularly purification of our minds. So let's just quickly, I think I've got time, just quickly run through some of the stages of the path of the Suddhimagga, the path of purity. But there's a couple of steps, they sort of lead from one to the other. There's a few of the steps are really, I think, quite key for embarking on the spiritual life towards enlightenment. So the path itself begins with ethics. So the 5 precepts, the idea of, with their positive formulation, doing deeds of loving kindness, doing no harm, cultivating deeds of loving kindness, being generous, cultivating simplicity and contentment, being truthful in our communications, be that by speech or email or telephone or text or whatever, and being mindful. So this, in a way, is the kind of foundation of purifying our mind. It's one of the easiest and simplest and most obvious steps. Because if we start to behave more ethically and to cultivate a sense of ethics, quite naturally, we feel that our mind becomes clearer. We are less troubled by thoughts of, I should have said that, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that. We're less troubled by the anguish that unethical behavior can cause. So we'll sleep better, we'll meditate better, because our minds are less troubled. Very, very simple, but quite profound and very important place to start. So then we move on to trying to rid ourselves of negative mental states, anger, jealousy, ignorance. And this is really where the mindfulness of breathing and the metta-bhavana come in. Our basic meditation practice. Our basic meditation practice is there to help purify our minds of these negative mental states that are unhelpful and hold us back. We can then move on to looking at the views, our views, trying to cultivate right views and trying to eradicate wrong views. For that, we can employ the 4 right efforts that we talk about commonly hear. So that's about maintaining already arisen positive mental states, encouraging the arising of the unarisen positive mental states, eradicating negative mental states that have arisen, and preventing the arising of unarisen negative mental states. So I'll give you all the tests. But basically, they're just the four right effort. They're about trying, as always, to keep our minds pure. And from the Buddhist perspective, there are basically three fundamental wrong views. Lots of views flow out from those views, but these are the three fundamental wrong views, which are that everything is due to a higher power. Everything is due to a higher power. Everything is the result of fate or destiny, or that everything happens by chance. There are lots of views that basically fit into those categories, but they are the fundamental wrong views. The right view would be things like conditionality, where all things arise independent of conditions. From universes to why Monday mornings never quite feel like Friday afternoon. It arises independent of conditions. Everything between those two ideas is one and as large as the other. The entirety of Darwin's theory of evolution fits perfectly into Buddha's theory of conditionality, but conditionality is vastly larger than that. The next one is the one I wanted to sort of dwell a little bit more on. It's called overcoming doubt. And it basically means overcoming our unwillingness to allow what we know to change us. How often, I've been there hundreds of times, how often are we knowing exactly what we need or should be doing, but not done it because of fear, because of doubt, because of all sorts of different reasons? Fear of change, fear of losing something that we hold valuable. But deep down, we know it's not actually the case. Now, doubt is a really interesting thing because it's there for a very good reason. It stops us being foolhardy. It stops us making stupid decisions. So in many cases, doubt is very helpful. We're very successful because we have doubt. It keeps us safe. But sometimes it keeps us too safe. And sometimes we have to overcome that. And in order to overcome that, we need certain qualities. We need wisdom. We need our wisdom to know what doubt is valid to keep us safe and what doubt is holding us back. And only you will be able to know what that is. But once we've kind of had the insight or the wisdom to see something, we still need some more. We need Shraddha. So Shraddha is a Buddhist word that is most commonly translated as faith. I think in some context, I think that's fine. In this context, I think that's a little weak. So in other contexts, Shraddha is translated as confidence. And I think that's getting better in this case. We need confidence to overcome our doubts about knowing what we should be doing, but not doing it. But actually, it's such a big step. It's such a kind of key step on the path. I think what a better translation in this circumstance is courage. We need courage together with our wisdom to take us through that doubt, to make the changes we need to change, to move towards the person we want to become. And the last thing I would kind of talk about that we'll also need is a sense of commitment. Commitment's really key in all sorts of levels. It's best. There's a very lovely analogy, which I think comes from the Zen tradition, which I'm very fond of, which states that if you want to get water from a well, you have to go to one well and put your bucket all the way to the bottom. How many of us in this choice-laden Western world go to 6 or 7 different wells, but only put the bucket halfway down? What chance have we of getting water if that's how we act? We find it, again and again. People come along for a few months, they love it, it's great, and then they hear about somebody on TikTok or whatever, and they go somewhere else. And then they love that, and then they get bored with it, and then they come back, and last a few months, and next thing they're off doing some esoteric yoga. It's marvelous. You're doing that, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. They're obviously searching. They obviously have a yearning. But when you have that yearning, you have to have a degree of commitment. You have to find something that works enough, and you have to commit to it. It's like climbing a mountain. To get to the top of a mountain, there might be a path up the north, south, east, and west faces. None of them will be easy. You've got thousands of meters of altitude to achieve, no matter where you start. But you'll never get anywhere near the top of the mountain if you do a few meters up. It's a bit tricky. And then you traverse around and up and down and back up the other one. And I don't like that street. So, you'll never get there if you keep chopping and changing. So you have to kind of decide, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it's absolutely perfect, it can be enough. The Buddha gave some very good advice as to what is good enough, as it were, which is a teaching. It's actually advice to his aunt. His aunt was getting confused. She was following the Dharma and was getting confused. So a revival teaching, according to the Buddha's advice to his aunt, is a teaching from wherever it comes, is a teaching that will lead one towards dispassion, towards freedom, towards simplicity of lifestyle, towards contentment, towards energy, towards an appreciation of solitude, and towards a delight in the good. So long as teachings take you in the direction of those things, they are, in Buddha's words, is Dharma. So wherever you find those sorts of teachings, in a way, according to the Buddha's own words, his advice to his own aunt, you can commit. You can think this will work. you can commit. So whatever path we choose after we've got our commitment, after we've overcome doubts, after we've got the courage, the wisdom to tell the difference between when we are just prevaricating and when we need to be cautious, and we've got the courage to do what we need to do to move ourselves towards the goal. Once we're on that path, we have to follow that path with receptivity. Receptivity is another important attitude or quality that we need. Receptivity to what's going on, how we're feeling, what we're thinking, where our moods are. To be receptive to both their being and their changing. Because it's being receptive to those things changing that gives us a feedback loop to our courage and confidence when we come across the next challenge that we have to overcome. We have to be responsive and receptive to the little voice inside us. The little voice inside us is often very, very wise. So Visuddhi, because we're just unfolding the Visuddhimagga, the path of purity. Visuddhi is an interesting word. It has, again, multiple translations in English. But Visuddhi also means bright, splendid, excellent, and beauty. So what we're being invited to, what the Buddha is trying through his experience and all his teaching to invite us all in, is a path of beauty, path of excellence, path of splendidness. So it's a path that I, and many of us here, want to follow, because we are naturally drawn forward by the unfolding inner beauty, for everything that changes and any sense of loss that we may fear on our way along the path is more than compensated by the beauty that replaces it. In that beauty, in a way, is the mystery that lurks and hides and emanates and resonates from behind the shrine. So I wish you courage when you're path towards it. Thank you.